Good evening. You're very welcome to this, the third webinar in the series from myself and my colleagues here in Teagasc, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal. My name is Cian Condon. I'm a dry stock advisor based in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim, and I'll be your host here this evening. Tonight, I'm joined by two of the most experienced and knowledgeable sheep advisors in the country, Tom Coll from the Mohill office and John Cannon from Letterkenny office. And they'll be covering parasites this evening, sheep parasites. So both Tom and John will be presenting for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll allow a nice bit of time, hopefully at the end, to allow for questions towards the end of the webinar. Since obviously we can't meet face-to-face and with seminars, farm walks, meetings and so on, we're hoping to keep things relatively interactive here. And at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function where you can send your questions in right throughout the night, and I'll put them to the panel there before the evening is through. So without any further ado, I'll pass you on to my colleague, Tom Coll. Tom, if you want to share your screen there and unmute, please.
So what I'm going to talk to you about this evening, you're very welcome. I'm going to talk to you about anthelmintic resistance in stomach and gut worms of sheep. So an outline, I'm going to talk to you about dosing for worms this winter, maybe what you should be doing at this point in time. Then I'll move on to talk about anthelmintic resistance and basically what is anthelmintic resistance, what's its impact on the stock on your farm, and what's the prevalence in Ireland. And then I'm going to move on to talking about 4 really important immediate actions that you can take on board to slow the development of anthelmintic resistance on your farm. So if we look at the parasite calendar, when it starts off if we look at across the year, in the spring, we're mainly with ewes and lambs, especially lambs, we're mainly worried about coccidiosis, nematodirus early on in the year. And then as we move through the year into the summer, when lambs get that bit bigger, then gutworms is the main parasite that will threaten our lambs, and lungworms. And then as we move on later on into the year, both for lambs and for ewes, fluke is the main parasite that we're worried about there. And as Cian said earlier there, John Cannon, my colleague, will cover the fluke aspect. So which sheep do I need to dose for worms this winter, and what product should I use? That's the main question, a lot of the question that we get asked now this time of year. So you have different stock types on your farm. You have the ewes, the replacement ewe lambs that are bred in your own farm, your own store lambs. And then for a lot of you, maybe buying in store lambs, you'll have some of them indoors, and some of them outdoors will go out onto your pastures. So if we start at the ewes, what Teagasc would we recommend there is that you don't dose ewes for worms unless there's a demonstrated need. As far as replacement ewe lambs and your own store lambs, what I would recommend is that you use an anthelmintic that works on your farm. And this should be based on a fecal egg count. And then for bought-in stores, both indoors and outdoors, I'd be recommending that you use an appropriate quarantine dose. Maybe for a lot of you, you think that's not really giving me an answer, but maybe at the end of the talk, we'll come back to it again. And hopefully through this talk, we'll be able to answer a lot of these questions for you, and you'll see where I came up with these answers and how relevant they are. So if we first look at the worm life cycle, I'm just going to get a pointer here if I can. I can't get it. If you look at the worm's life cycle, the life cycle itself, half of the life cycle of the worm takes place in the free living stage. That takes place out in your grass from the time the eggs are passed out onto the dung. They go through 2 different larval stages, and then they go out onto the grass then, and if there's moisture present, then they swim up the leaves of the grass and they're eaten by the sheep. And then that goes into the parasitic stage then, like that's the parasites in the sheep. So The parasitic stage, then they go through again 2 different larval stages, and then they form the adult, and that roughly takes 2 to 3 weeks, depending on different conditions. Like so, in all, it takes anything from 4 to 6 weeks for that life cycle to complete. So if we go on to look at your pastures out there, like, and the pasture larval buildup, the pasture larval buildup kind of starts off in if we look at January. One thing we say about the larvae on your pasture, that they're to survive the winter, they're there all year. There's always a certain amount on your pasture. And if we look at the green kind of triangle there, that's the larva that comes from your ewes when they're eggs that are housed and ewes are maybe out over the winter. When they come out onto the pastures, they're the main source of eggs and then of larvae then for the follow on to the year. After that, then your lambs take over. Like, so the lambs are starting to eat grass and they're picking up larvae, and the larvae are reproducing in those, and eggs being shed by the lambs, and then that pushes the overall pasture contamination up. And if we just having the pointer there, just I can't get it, but if you look from July to August, there's a distinct rise there, and normally in most years, apart from maybe very, very dry years, there's a distinct rise there in pasture contamination. So your lambs could be exposed to huge intakes of larvae, and that maybe trigger off maybe in your head, maybe to get in there and wean early. Like, if you think your lambs are going to be constantly eating a lot of larvae, you can wean them and then put them to pastures that are less contaminated. That'd be maybe pastures that weren't grazed in the year, or pastures that that you cut a silage off and there's silage after grass there, like, and then you can use the ewes then, like, to mop up those heavy larval burdens then, like, when the ewes are dry. And the one thing we should say, like, that there can be a big variation across fields in your farm and across paddocks in your farm as far as contamination is concerned, and it's basically all due to the grazing pressures when the larval counts are highest in the sheep, and then they pass them onto the grass. So what anthelmintic drugs or classes are available there to treat the worms on your farm? Well, you have the whites, you have the yellows, the clears, the orange, and the purples. I'm not going to go into the trade names of them, or the different classes, or the trade names in them. But what we'll say is, like, back in the whites first came out in 1961, and it only took 3 years for the first reported case of resistance in them. For the yellows, they came out in 1970, and by 1979 there was resistance reported. The clears, 1981, and by 1988 there was cases of resistance reported in those. And now for the two new prescription only drugs that we have, Zolvix and Startec. Zolvix came out in 2009. There was reported instance of resistance in 2013, so that's very worrying. And then for the purples, they came out in 2010, and by 2016, I think there's question marks over that, that there could be some instance of resistance to it. Like, so they're very worrying trends, and this is why we have to look at anthelmintic resistance and try and get it at the early stage. So what is anthelmintic resistance? Anthelmintic resistance is the genetic ability of a worm to survive a dose of anthelmintic that should kill it. We all hear about global warming, and we may talk about global warming. It's actually global warming that probably causes anthelmintic resistance, because farmers are probably doing too much worming or too little worm, underdosing. But it's overuse of the products is generally, and not dosing to the right weight. They're the things that lead to anthelmintic resistance, and we'll go through those maybe at a later stage. But basically, you can see it here on the left there. If you have a resistant worm there's one grey worm there, and or larvae in the sheep, and then that you dose that animal, then it gives all the susceptible ones will be killed, and the resistant ones will survive, and then there's going to be more resistant ones there the next time you treat, and the next time again, especially if you're treating with a drug that actually won't kill the resistant worms. So it's the more you use an ineffective drug, the more you're selecting for the resistant worms, and the problem exacerbates then. So what impact is there? What has the impact of anthelmintic resistance? You can see here on the left-hand side there, we look at lamb performance, and then we look at the bottom there, we have the percentage of resistant worms on the farm or on the flock. So we're not too worried when the drug is 90%, 95% working, and that or 95% effective. Generally doesn't affect performance. It's when that 95% then reduces to maybe 80%, down to 60%, and then maybe down to 50%. There's a gradual reduction in lamb performance, and especially then we kind of fall off a cliff face then when the percentage of resistant worms increases above 50%. There's an obvious kind of, you can see it, lambs aren't thriving, whereas up at the orange stage there, like, you know, the only way you're going to find that out is if you carry out a drench test and find out, you know, how effective your dose, the products that you're using really are. So what we're saying there, you know, at the early stage there, up at the top of that arrow, maybe just hopefully in the green stage, that's the time to intervene. And that's the time that you should be using these 4 practices I'm going to talk about now in a minute. So one bit of good news is that the prevalence of anthelmintic resistance in nematodirus, nematodirus is the first worm that you're going to come across in the year. That normally occurs in April, maybe into early May, depending on temperature conditions, and normally you get a nematodirus forecast, but there's none detected there as far as anthelmintic resistance to nematodirus. So that's good news, and that kind of determines what drug you should use at that particular time of the year. So we look at the prevalence of anthelmintic resistance and strungles, and they're the worms you're going to maybe incorporate, and they're going to be on your pastures maybe from June on to the end of the year. Maybe more towards the end of the year, then you're going to come across Trichus strungulus, probably Teagasc early on in the year. So if we look at for a lot of you probably on the call here on the webinar, you all carried out a drench test in probably 2013 to 2015, and we'll go through that in a minute. I'll show you a little video on that. And the results of that are that, you know, the percentage of farms with an anthelmintic, with actually anthelmintic treatment failure. If we look at the white drenches there, on the 70% of farms, they didn't kill more than 95% of the worms, so they're ineffective. If we look at the levamisols there, 50% of them were ineffective, or we had treatment failure. And the levamisols, about over 40% of those, you know, didn't do what they should be doing and didn't kill 95% of the worms. So that was a worrying trend back in 2013. Probably a lot of you probably found that out at the time, and maybe probably for a lot of you as well, you know, probably didn't do anything about it since, like. So maybe now is the time to act. So if we follow on there was 19 farms, there's a fecal egg count reduction test where there was a fecal egg count done post and pre or pre and post dosing, 2 fecal egg counts taken. And what that showed was for the 19 farmers, the white drenches were basically ineffective on a lot of those farms. Not totally ineffective. They still killed a certain percentage of the worms, but they didn't kill more than 95% of them. The levamisols seemed to be more effective. Only 20% of the farms there showed that showed treatment failure. And again, for the ivermectins, there seemed to be a worrying trend there that it was nearly 60% of the farms that did a fecal egg count reduction test in 2018 and 19, that there was drug failure there. Like. So again, another worrying trend was on some of the farms there was triple resistance, where the benzimidazoles, the levamisols, and ivermectins, and neither of them were working, like, you know, so that's a worrying trend. So now I'm going to talk about 4 practices to slow the development of anthelmintic resistance on your farm. Now, if you take nothing home, only these 4 practices, we've got a good message out of tonight. So the first one is don't dose mature animals for worms unless there's a demonstrated need. So it's pretty controversial. A lot of farmers, they're fond of dosing their ewes for worms. And unless there's a demonstrated need, the demonstrated need is not, taking a fecal egg count and showing it high. Mature animals have their own built-up immunity to worms, so it doesn't really affect them. A lot of them. Some of them, maybe something else is compromising their immune system, and the worms may affect them. So a demonstrated need, maybe thin ewes going to the ram, or maybe it's too late at that stage, but thin ewes on the farm, maybe there's an opportunity there to maybe treat them. So we don't worry too much about treating 1 or 2 ewes, but definitely not the entire flock of ewes. And the main reason for that, is if you dose ewes, maybe in the autumn or especially pre-turnout, they maybe have ewes' immunity is low at that stage, and they may be shedding a lot of eggs onto the pasture. So if you dose with something that you don't know is fully effective, then the eggs that are going to be passed out onto those pastures in March and April could well be all resistant eggs, when the pasture levels of larvae, as you see here in the screen, are low. So that means that a large proportion of the larvae that are going to be out on the pastures are going to be resistant larvae. They're going to be picked up by the lambs. The lambs are going to recycle those, and you're going to end up with a lot of resistant parasites on your pasture as a result of that. And that will basically speed up the rate that you go from 5% up to 50% resistant worms in your farm. Normally, that could take anything from up to 20 years for it to go from 5% resistant to 50%. But if you do things incorrectly, you could achieve that in maybe less than 3 years. So that's vitally important. My screen has frozen here now. Right, yeah. So good practice 2 is to do a drench test. And most of you will go through the drench test in a minute, and a fecal egg count. So you need to find out how effective the products you're using really are, and use a fecal egg count from June to September to determine the need to dose. So a lot of farmers out there are probably dosing, what we were finding anyway, like in any of the farms we were monitoring, times that farmers would normally dose, the counts could be very low. Maybe times when they should be dosing, and wouldn't dose if they left a long period between dosing, the counts could be very high, so you should monitor when to dose by using the counts. Good practice 3 is use only the white drench to treat for nematovirus. As I said, there's no resistance to white drenches detected for nematovirus, and we've seen from the results of the drench test that was carried out in 2013, they're generally not that effective later on in the season anyway, the white drenches. And the last good practice 4 is to use a quarantine drench in all bought-in sheep. That's even ewes, rams, anything you buy in. The one ram can still bring in resistant worms into your flock. So avoid buying in resistant worms. So what we recommend there, use an orange, that's Zolvix, plus a yellow or a clear, or use the StarTech purple drench if you can get it. It's not really available at the minute, and use that in combination with the yellow drench. Important thing here is that you house the sheep for 48 hours, because they still could be laying eggs that may go out onto the pasture. And then you turn those sheep after 48 hours back onto ground that's your own sheep have been grazing. So any dung that the sheep shed inside, that should go into the slurry tank or into the manure pit, to kill off any surviving larvae. So now I'm going to show you, Teagasc put together a little video just to maybe simplify a lot of the things I've been talking about, and it'll go through we'll go through the drench test and different categories of drugs out there. So I'm just going to play the video now. Just bear with me for a minute, and hopefully it comes up fairly quickly.
Stomach worms are a significant cause of production loss in lambs. The sheep pick up the infective larvae while grazing. The ingested larvae then mature in the digestive tract of the sheep, mate and lay eggs which are passed out onto the pasture in the feces. This is how the life cycle completes, with the eggs hatching into infective larvae and swimming up onto the leaves of the grass to be eaten by more sheep. In order to control these worms, over the last 60 years, sheep farmers have used anthelmintics, also known as wormers, to kill worms in the digestive tracts of the sheep. To kill worms, there are lots of different products on the market, but the commonly available ones all belong to just one of three classes. These are Class 1, the benzimidazoles or white wormers. Even though not all of these are white in colour, some are off blue or pink. Class 2, levamisole or yellow wormers. And Class 3, the macrocyclic lactone or clear wormers, which are available in injectable or oral formulation. There are also two relatively new classes of wormers, which are Class 4, Zolvix, and Class 5, Startect. When a population of stomach worms inside a sheep is exposed to an anthelmintic, a small number of worms can survive the treatment that should normally kill them. These are what we call resistant worms, and they pass their resistant genes onto their offspring. Therefore, the more frequently we treat the sheep, the more often we select for resistant worms. This is why it is important to reduce the amount of unnecessary anthelmintic treatments that we give to our sheep. A good example of this is not treating adult ewes for stomach worms unless there is a demonstrated need. That means the worms do not usually have a negative effect on them, and treating ewes simply selects for the resistant stomach worms, ensuring that all the eggs being passed out onto the pasture are from resistant worms. Worms that are not exposed to anthelmintics are what we term as refugia. These are worms on pasture and worms inside in sheep that are not treated with anthelmintics. These are important in terms of maintaining susceptible populations of stomach worms on the pasture so that we can continue to have effective anthelmintics with which to treat our sheep. Effective drenching techniques are critical in ensuring that anthelmintics or wormers have the best chance at killing the worms present in the sheep. The steps to ensure effective drenching are: 1. Ensure that the product is within its use-by date and shake the product vigorously prior to opening to ensure it is properly mixed. 2. Calibrate your dosing equipment. Ensure that your dosing gun is delivering the appropriate amount of product. 3. Don't just guess the weight of the sheep. Weigh a sample of the largest sheep and treat all the sheep in the group according to the weight of the heaviest in the group. Use as per manufacturer's instructions. 4. Ensure that each animal completely swallows the anthelmintic by applying the product over the back of the tongue. 5. Test the efficacy of the anthelmintics periodically to ensure that they are killing at least 95% of the worms present. This involves comparing a pre-treatment fecal egg count with a post-treatment fecal egg count. For yellow drenches, Class 2, it means waiting 7 days post-treatment before taking the post-treatment fecal sample, and for white and clear drenches, Classes 1 and 3, this means waiting 14 days post-treatment. Another potential source of resistant worms can be bought in sheep. It is important that when buying sheep or bringing sheep onto your holding from another holding, that you take steps to eliminate any anthelmintic resistant worms that those sheep may have. This can be achieved by treating sheep with an anthelmintic that is known to be effective even against anthelmintic resistant parasites. These are Class 4, Zolvix, or Class 5, Startect. Either of these can be used in conjunction with levamisole, or in the case of Zolvix, it can also be used in conjunction with Class 3, macrocyclic lactones. It is important to understand that even though these products will kill the worms in the digestive tracts of the sheep, these worms will already have laid eggs which will be working their way out of the sheep in the feces. In order to prevent these eggs from contaminating the pasture, it is recommended that sheep are housed for 48 hours after treatment before being turned out onto pasture on which sheep have been grazed recently. Contact your Teagasc advisor for more information.
So a nice little video there. And that video is available on YouTube if any of you want to go and look it up and look at it later on. There's great messages in it. So again, back to the first slide that I showed you, one of the first slides is which sheep do I need to dose for worms this winter and what products should I use? So now there shouldn't be any question marks over not dosing yos unless there's a demonstrated need. For worms, John will talk to you about there is a need for dosing them for fluke. And then the replacement yo lambs and the own store lambs. Now you know why I said an anthelmintic that works in your farm. And it should be based on a fecal egg count. And generally, if we look at the results, like it's probably going to be a clear or yellow at the stage of the year that's going to work on your farm. As we say, like there's a lot of failure there to the white drenches. And then for any bought-in sheep, when they come indoors or outdoors, any bought-in sheep, whether it's yos, lambs, even one ram, you should be out there and you should be buying Zolvex, or if you can get it, StarTech, but probably Zolvex is the one that's available now, and use that in combination with a yellow or a clear drench, and use yellow in conjunction with the purple drench because it already contains the clear in its makeup. So what I'd be saying to you, try and adopt all 4 practices, and you need to start today because there are sheep farms out there who have triple resistance. Tomorrow or next year, the year after that, it could be you, and there may be no option but to get out of sheep because due to lack of thrive and products not working. So the last thing I'm going to say is make that U-turn before it's too late. So thank you very much, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Letterkenny for supplying a lot of the slides and information. So thanks very much, and I'll pass you over to Cian now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for that excellent presentation. So I can see time is moving along. I know we've a fair bit to get through tonight, so I will straight away call on John, if that's okay. John, can you come online there? Thanks very much, and share your screen, please.
Good evening. As Cian said, I'm a sheep advisor based in Letterkenny, and tonight I'm going to talk to you about liver fluke. Now, the structure of my talk will be along the following lines. I'll ask a key question at the beginning. I'll explain why liver fluke is still a problem despite all the products and dosing that has gone on over the last 30 or 40 years. Give you some background information and talk about diagnosis, prevention and control. Give you some take-home messages, and at the end, I'll make some brief comments on rumen fluke. The question I'm going to pose here, and hopefully you'll be able to answer it at the end of the talk, are you using the correct fluke control approach for your farm? And there's 3 possible answers. Yes, I am. No, but I know now what change to make. Or the third possibility is, no, I'm not making the right choices now, but I will go and get more advice or guidance. Now, why is liver fluke still a problem? First of all, it's a complicated life cycle. There's 2 hosts involved, the sheep and the mud snail. The role of water is very important. Rainfall is, this part of the country is quite high. It varies from season to season. And also there's different land types. Some land or some fields are wetter than others, as I needn't explain to you. Another point is, Gary covered liver fluke in cattle 2 weeks ago, but liver fluke in sheep is different. Number one is cattle are much bigger than sheep, and they're able to handle a higher burden of infection. Secondly, sheep graze much closer to the ground and are picking up more infective larvae. So that's 2 key differences involved there. And the third difference is that cattle are generally housed early in the winter time before they're picking up huge burdens, and they're housed in September, October time a lot of the time. Sheep don't develop tolerance was age, as they do with worms, as Tom explained. When liver fluke, they're susceptible all the time. Another reason is the incorrect use of flukicides, the wrong product being used the wrong time. Not using all the information available to us, be it from information from research, dung samples, slaughter reports are very important. Advertising the market, and there's also maybe confusion. And just as I'd like to thank Chris Lyons for allowing me to go down and photograph this slide in the Arivo store in Letterkenny. This is just an array of products that a farmer faces when they go in to buy a control for liver fluke. And it's difficult to make a choice unless you're armed with the correct knowledge. Background now information. Liver fluke is a flatworm. It's very pathogenic, or causes quite a lot of disease. It infects cattle and sheep of all ages, and it also infects rabbits and deer. The mud snail is very important and an intermediate host. And it's also, it can vary from year to year depending on the farm, how wet it is, and parts of the farm that the sheep are grazing in, whether they're wet or dry fields. We're concerned about liver fluke because of its economic loss. You have reduced performance of sheep. Thinner sheep in September time result in lower litter size in the springtime. Less lambs being born. You can have a longer lambing spread as well. And there's also poor thriving lambs, especially during October to December, when they've picked up a lot of liver fluke larvae. You have the loss of liver value, and you might say, well, I don't get paid for the liver anyway, but the butcher or the abattoir is getting paid for it. So at the end of the day, if the liver is damaged, you will pay. Mortality is another issue, dead sheep or dead lambs. I just mentioned 2 points here regarding the life cycle. It's a complicated one, but there's 2 points. First of all, if a sheep picks up an infective egg today, or larva, it takes 10 to 12 weeks for that to mature, so that the sheep is passing out eggs again onto the pasture. Number 2 is, if eggs that are passed out by sheep can't infect other sheep, they first of all have to pass through the mud snail, and then they become infective then following that, and that takes a bit of time. So generally, the life cycle, as far as we in Ireland is concerned, the main risk period is October time, October, November onwards. Now, this is an important slide here. It shows us that the liver fluke stages in sheep. First of all, you have the infective stage here, when the larvae that are picked up by the sheep are burrowing from the digestive tract or the stomach towards the liver, and that takes a number of a few weeks to happen. Then you have and just if we can get a pointer there, later. Then you have the immature stage, and that happens while the larvae are in the liver. They're sucking on blood and they're maturing, and they're causing quite a lot of damage at that point, because the sheep are depending on the burden of larvae that has been picked up. That determines the amount of damage caused. Really, 1 or 2 larvae don't do much damage, but if picked up a large burden to graze in a wet field, grazing close to the ground, it can be very serious, and you can have very severe liver damage. And then the last stage there is the mature stage, when the fluke are adults and they're feeding and they're passing out eggs, and that happens when they're in the sheep for about 12 weeks. But it's important to realize that a sheep can have all 3 stages at the one time. So, they could have picked up infective larvae in September, but if they're not treated, by January, they'll have adult stages and they'll have immature stages, and they'll still be picking up maybe infective larvae again. And that is very important when we're deciding what product to use to dose them. Now here we have two examples here of liver damage. One, that the liver has been damaged some time ago, but possibly the sheep has been treated and and recovered, but you can see that the damage is still there, and it will still be causing a lack of performance in that animal. Secondly, you have some current damage there, and you can see that the current damage is caused, the bleeding. And if you had time there and maybe look close enough, you could see some examples of Fluke. But that just gives you an example of what number one, what livers look like, and explain the damage. Liver is a very important organ in the body. It's very important for fat breakdown and carbohydrate metabolism. It removes toxins as well from the body and plays a key role in the immune system of the sheep. So liver damage, has a knock-on effect on the animal's performance. Now here we just have a slide here on the pattern of infection on the pasture. You can see here over the winter time, over the spring, the numbers of infective larvae maybe decrease as the weather gets drier into the summer, and but the egg has been passed out by the snail then in the summertime, generally cause infection in the autumn. So as the season gets wetter, the infection builds up then into the autumn. So summer infection of snails accounts for the majority of disease outbreak in the autumn or winter. So that's why the summer generally isn't a problem. So it's into the autumn and winter that you have a problem. Now, diagnosis. Well, first of all, the farm has three. That's a key thing. Farmers will know if they have a problem or not, and they should know. The season of the year as well. You should be on guard from especially from October onwards. Investigate any sudden deaths. Get a post-mortem done. For examination of the livers. Fecal egg counts can be useful, but unlike worms, first of all, a negative fecal egg count doesn't mean that you have no infection, and because first of all, that a fluke that's in the yolk for less than 12 weeks will not be shedding any eggs, and as well as that not all liver flukes don't always shed eggs. So that's important. If you are doing a fecal count or taking a dung sample, you should do it possibly from December onwards, and take at least 10 to 15 sheep and do a composite sample, or take a dung from at least 10 to 15 sheep. Slaughter reports are a very, very good source of information, and especially from now on. And just an example there of slaughter reports, lamb slaughter from October to December, and ewe slaughtered at any time, will give you an indication. But beef health check, a lot of sheep farmers also have cattle, so the beef health check is very important. And you also can maybe information from the beeps fecal counts that some of you would have submitted there and before the end of October. Prevention. We're into the control stage now, and one of the methods would be avoid grazing the wettest areas and high risk periods that have been November to January. All farmers will have wetter areas and drier areas, and try and avoid the wetter areas if you can from November to January to graze the drier areas at that point of the year if you have sheep out. Drainage of localized wet areas can reduce the snail habitat, and fencing off of snail habitats as well, particularly in high risk periods. But some of you might say, well, that's not practical. It has to be practical. It depends on the type of farm you have. If you have dry areas and wet areas, that's practical. If all your farm is very wet, well, it mightn't be that practical. Another practical solution is that the housing of lowland flocks helps to control the liver fluke problem as well. Because they're not out in the pasture grazing. Treatment now with chemicals plays a big part in liver fluke control, and it kills what's in the animal and also prevents shedding eggs in the springtime. Now the aims of treatment. The autumn treatment of liver fluke, what are you trying to do this time of year, early September, October time? You're trying to prevent immature fluke migrating to the liver and allowing them to develop. So you're trying to kill the immatures in the autumn time. In the winter time, when we're coming into that stage now, late November, December time, you're trying to kill immatures and adults. There'll be some of them maybe in them maybe 3 months at this stage or coming up to it. So you're trying to kill those and prevent further damage and ill thrift. And then in the springtime or early summer treatment, you're trying really to reduce, remove adult flukes from the sheep and prevent, eggs being passed out to infect the mud snail over the spring and summer period. But really, even in the springtime, you could also be trying to kill the immatures at that stage. So they're not all distinct and separate. Now, this is an important slide, and I'll spend maybe about 3 minutes on it or 4 because it's there's a lot of information on it, and any that have a mobile phone there, it might be worth taking a screenshot of it for yourselves later on. First of all, on the left-hand side here, we have the active components, active ingredients, and you have triclobendazole, closanthal, nitroxanil, rifoxanide, but just closanthal and rifoxanide are very similar chemicals, so they really can be treated as kind of the one group. The oxyclosanide and albendazole are the other 2 products, and the brand names are here. Triclobendazole, one of the first ones there was Fastnex. You also have Endofluke, Fassi-Free, Trabex. Closanthal, you'll be familiar with Fluke Life. Nitroxanil, sold as Teagasc. Rifoxanide, you have Ranide or Ridofluke, and you have others as well. And oxyclosanide would be sold as Zanil, Levifast Diamond, and albendazole would be an Albex or one of the white wormers. The withdrawal period then is along this column, and I'll not dwell too much on that. But along the right-hand column then, we have the stage of the liver fluke that is controlled by the product. Now, you'll notice there that in the red column here, that shows that all the products kill adult fluke. So that's good news. But these 2 white circles here, these 2 products, they'll only kill 50% of flukes that are 10 weeks old, and maybe 70% of those that are 11 weeks old. It takes them to be in nearly 12 weeks before they get an 80 to 90% kill by those 2 products. So they're quite limited in their effectiveness. On the other hand, triclobendazole, it kills nearly all stages across here. The early immatures from about a week old to the immatures. But I'll say a word about triclobendazole. Tom mentioned resistance to wormers. There was evidence of resistance to the triclobendazole products in Sligo Leitrim in a study that was done there in 2012. When there was, some resistance found on about 80% of the farms. But it's like the other wormer products, unless you have done a check yourself, you don't know what the situation is in your farm. And as well as that, even in the farms in Sligo Leitrim, those products could have changed since then. So the other products, there might be something happening there as well. Closanthal, nitroxanil, and rifoxanide, I'll group those 3 together because you can see there that they'll kill 90% of anything that's 6 weeks in the sheep at that stage, or in the yellow box there. You might say, oh, closanthal is a bit better. Well, it might be a bit better at maybe 4 weeks, but it's only maybe killing 20 to 23%. So really, you want to be getting a 90% kill to be really talking about effectiveness. So those groups will kill anything in the sheep for 6 weeks or more. These 2 products down here, as I said, are quite limited. And I highlight this here, this 4-day withdrawal period, because many farmers that have sheep slaughtered in we'll say October time, and they might have got evidence back that there was liver fluke present, might rush it out and dose this product because it's a short withdrawal period. Well, the fact that it only kills really adults that are 12 weeks old, which are unlikely to be in the sheep in October. So I would say that somebody like that would be better off keeping the money, wait till COVID restrictions ease, and go out and have a meal or a few pints or whatever. So that's again, so to recap on that, triclobendazole kills all stages from week up. Closantel, nitroxanil, and rifoxide kill something from 6 or 7 weeks up, and oxyclosinide and albendazole really from about 12 weeks. Now, I've given a lot of information, but I'll just highlight two little booklets that are available to all farmers free of charge. Now, this was drawn up, a compendium done up by Dr. Barbara Good in 2018. The products covered are wormers, flucicides, dips, porons, injectables, and coccidiostats, or products for the control of coccidiosis in sheep. This is an A4 sized version here, and here we have a small waterproof version that'll fit in your hip pocket, and you can take it out to the yard with you. And there should be supplies available in your local Teagasc office, or go online and you can print it off as well. This is just a page from the book, from the A4 size book, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but it gives a lot of information on each active ingredient and how it's sold and withdrawal dates. Points to remember now: no flucicide has any persistent activity, even in combinations, even in combination with worms that have residual activity. So the day you dose is the day you kill. It doesn't work 2 days later. If you want to control liver fluke, use a product specifically for liver fluke. Avoid the use of fluke and wormers because when they're really effective, is very, very limited. Sheep never develop tolerance or immunity to liver fluke. They're always susceptible. So you always need to be dosed, as well as lambs or whatever. Damage is done by all stages of liver fluke. So you could have a sheep infected with the immatures, I would say in the months of February, March, you could have immatures and mature fluke. And the physical signs of the disease would say, the classic signs in the past, maybe talking about a bottle under the jaw of Teagasc fluid. It depends on the level of challenge, and it depends on the reaction of the sheep as well. Biosecurity was mentioned by Tom, and I'll mention it as well. Very important that you don't want buy-in resistant sheep that are carrying resistance to any of to triclobendazole. It's more difficult in regard to the health situation where you have mixing of different flocks. But here we'll allow in a good quarantine procedure, and that was recommended by Dr. Orly Keane. And I'd also like to acknowledge Orly Keane for the use of many of the slides that I've used here tonight. Treat purchase stock with closantel or nitroxanil, and keep them in for 48 hours, as Tom said, and then put them to graze on the driest part of farms for a minimum of 4 weeks. Repeat that treatment 6 weeks later if you're using closantel, or 7 weeks later if you're using nitroxanil. As a quarantine procedure, we wouldn't, we're not recommending triclobendazole because of the evidence that there were some farms showed up resistance in Sligo Leitrim in 2012. So that's the 2-dose strategy there, recommended as a quarantine treatment for bought in stock. Take home messages. To administer the drugs effectively really is the blunt message. The right dose in the right way at the right time gives a maximum kill. Dose at the rate advised for the heaviest animal in the group. Check the accuracy of the dosing equipment, and check it often. Use the correct dosing technique. Use the correct product. Choose the correct product or active ingredient the class, and have a knowledge of what stage of liver fluke it's targeting and what stage you want to target. Administer it at the appropriate time. And again, you can check the effectiveness by checking for slaughter reports. After you dose, we'll say whenever after the withdrawal period is up, or maybe fecal samples as well. But give a health word in regard to the usefulness of fecal samples for liver fluke. Now, this is just a kind of maybe another kind of a take-home message here for you. A typical treatment, in a year with an average rainfall and you can see that maybe this year I would count it above average at the minute. So, but a year with a history of liver fluke, treat the sheep in September, October time, and again 2 to 3 weeks post housing in December, January, with a flukicide that is effective against young and mature fluke. Treat in late April was a flukicide that is effective against maybe mature fluke at that stage. But in a year like this, where you have quite a wet year, maybe a mid-November dose would be needed too in many farms. And farmers will, by knowing by the history and by the records, what they need to do. If you have a farm with no history of liver fluke, well, my advice would be to take fecal samples from 10 ewes, send them to the lab for analysis, and see if you get a positive result. And if there's evidence of liver fluke, treat the whole flock. Now, best to wait probably to December to do that, or even later if possible. Now, that's just 2 examples. You could also have a farm, other farms that are in between that. Okay. Another bit of take-home advice: have a flock health plan based on the farm history, on veterinary advice, slaughter reports, etc. Educate yourself, read the label, and use research advice. A quick word now to finish up on rumen fluke or stomach fluke. It infects the same intermediate hosts as the liver fluke, the snail, one snail. The presence of adult rumen flukes in the rumen is not normally associated with disease, so they could be there, but not causing disease. And even if you find rumen fluke eggs in the dung sample, it doesn't mean that you need to dose. If the animal is thriving and in good condition, the Teagasc advice is generally not to do anything. If you have, on the other hand, if you have sheep that have been dosed for liver fluke, maybe even a number of times, and they're still not thriving and they're thin, maybe, and if they have shown up rumen fluke in a fecal sample, it might be an opportunity then to discuss with your veterinary practitioner. Don't rush in and use a product, because there's only one product that controls rumen fluke, which is oxyclosinide or Zanil, or Levifast Diamond. And if we lose the effectiveness there, we have no other option. So, minimize the use of that product as much as possible. Now, for further information, you can go online to Teagasc, the Animal Health website as well, or the Mohill organization in Scotland has also done a lot of research on liver fluke. So thank you, and if there's any questions, we'll try and answer them.
Lovely. Thanks very much, John. You can stop sharing your screen there. Thanks very much. There have been a good number of questions. We are coming up to 5 to 9 now, so I'm going to run through some of the questions. So if you can try and answer them and keep your answers relatively short, we'll try and get through as many as we can here by about 9 o'clock, or a little bit along with it. We'll just go back to Tom's presentation there. Tom, the first one, how long do larvae live on the grass after sheep are moved off a paddock?
We know that the larvae can survive for the full 12 months. They probably even survive even longer. That's why we were saying, if you have resistant larvae on your pasture, and maybe even triple resistance, the only way is to get out of sheep, plough up the fields, and leave them for ploughed up, and then that's when the larvae can survive. But they probably can survive for 2 to 3 years, so on pasture, if the conditions are optimal.
Thanks very much, Tom. Again, straightforward enough question here. Should you dose for worms if you see no evidence?
No, if no evidence, what does it mean? Are you weighing your lambs, and are they thriving? So if the lambs are thriving and there's no issue, you probably don't need to dose for worms. So basically look for evidence of lack of thrive. So it shouldn't be visual. It should be based on weigh-ins.
Yeah,
maybe body condition scores.
A couple here on the prescription onlys. Can you use class 4 and 5 all year round?
Yeah, we're not recommending that you use class 4s and 5s all year round, because as you've seen, some of them broke down already, and basically that's overuse. The more often you use them, chances are that you're going to build up the resistance to those. But maybe what we are recommending that use them maybe at the time of the year, I showed you where the pasture build up on the larvae. So maybe you'd use them in July and August when maybe a lot of your lambs are sold on. You could dose the rest of the lambs as a kind of break dose with either probably Zolvix or StarTech as a kind of clean out dose. Like, so that's, and maybe that's something that we all should be doing, like, is maybe use them once in the year. And that maybe after weaning, when the worm counts go up, and use it as kind of a break dose there, like, just to give the other anthelmintics a chance to keep on working on your farm as well.
Just there's a similar question to that, just maybe refined a little bit about using Zolvix on your own replacements in the autumn as a once-off.
Yeah, so that's basically what I recommend that most farmers should be. There's a cost to that, like, so maybe that's why we use it in the autumn, like when the counts are high. You don't want to be doing all the lambs, but it costs over €1 a lamb, like, for it. So it's relatively expensive, and it's a prescription only, like, so you can only get it from your vet.
Yeah. Another question here is a double dose of yellow or clear drench the same as a dose of the orange drench? It says from cost point of view, Zolvix is expensive to buy to do 2 or 3 stock rams that are bought in, and more likely the yellow or clear drenches are lying about there in the yard from the springtime.
Yeah, so when you buy in 2 or 3 rams, a couple of things are unknown to you, and the farmers that selling them is hardly going to be able to tell you either, like, what his resistance status is. So you don't know whether them rams coming in are, they're carrying worms that are resistant to the yellows plus the clears. Like, that's why we recommend that you use Zolvix as your quarantine dose. Maybe there's the odd chance it mightn't work, but there's a very good chance that it will wipe out everything out in them. Like, so we know there's reported cases and high reported incidence of resistance to the clears and the yellows. So my recommendation is that you use a Zolvix as your quarantine dose, and don't chance the others, because you don't know, like, what the sheep is carrying in.
Just one more for the moment now, Tom. I prefer not to dose for worms, but I find in April and May that the yolks become very scoury and only dry up after a worm dose. I routinely dose for Fluke throughout the winter and spring. Any suggestions?
Yeah, again, like, if you're dosing the sheep in the springtime, like when, some of those yolks, because of the periparturient rise, they might be carrying a hell of a lot of worms, and their own immune systems are low, and they'll be shed a lot out in the grass. Like, what I was saying during the talk there, like, if you go and use a dose there and you're not fully sure whether that dose is fully effective, everything that they'll be shedding out into the grass then is resistant worms, like, so that's not something we need. Just because yolks are, may not be a worm count that's causing them to scour. It could be lush, wet grass. So if yolks are in good body condition score and not really affected, like, by worms, like, as I said earlier, you shouldn't really be dosing them. So we wouldn't recommend that you dose those type of yolks at all.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. I'll run a few by John there. John, just a simple enough question here about how often to change your Fluke drench. The question is, should you be changing it every 12 to 18 months? But maybe you can comment on that in general.
Well, it's a good practice to rotate your products anyway, for a start. Now, there's different schools of thought on that, but the main thing really is if you're, because of the resistance to and the cyclobendazole, if you're dosing in the autumn time, September, October time, I would favor a cyclobendazole product there. Maybe change into a different product then in the November time, when you have a bigger range of products that are effective to the stages then. And you could also maybe change to a third different product again in January, February. You could maybe use, say, cyclobendazole, closanthal, cyclobendazole November, December, closanthal in November, and maybe Teagasc or the nitroxanil in the springtime.
Okay. A general question again here about how often you should be dosing for Fluke in an area that has shown a high incidence of it in the past, or how would you determine how often?
Well, I outlined in a year there, maybe 3 to 4 doses you'll be talking about there. But and again, it's back to your flock health plan at that stage. you would have, let's say, if you had a 4-dose strategy and it was working for you, well, then you continue with that. If it's not working, well, then you discuss with your vet, where you might, stick in a 5th dose somewhere along the line. But if you have a high incidence on a wettish type farm, you're probably talking on a 4-dose strategy anyway. You're talking about October, November, September, October time first, maybe mid-November, sometime after housing, and again in the springtime.
Okay, thanks, John. Just a couple of more. I know we're over time, but we have just a couple of more questions to get to. There's two here that are maybe quite a little bit similar. One is asking about a treatment to target the mud snail, and the second is about having poultry utilizing them either in a rotation or actually, just having them on the farm as well. Really targeting the mud snail as a means of breaking the life cycle.
Well, maybe in the past there might have been chemicals used to target the mud snail, but I think in the present time, was our concern for the environment that's not a road we're going down. Drainages and maybe fencing off areas are the only kind of targets, or maybe avoiding grazing wet areas during high risk periods is what we'd be thinking of there.
Yeah, and just the last one, one more question for the both of you after this, but just one question there, and it's one that's asked every year, in meetings and groups. How many weeks after housing should you wait before giving them fluke drench to give a complete clean out? Early, well, the question's immature, early, and mature, but maybe you can comment on that, Jeff.
Well, if you wanted to, it depends on the product you're using for a start. Now, if you're using cyclopentazole and if you knew there's no resistance there, possibly you're chatting 2 weeks after you house. If you're using one of them from the closantel, the nitroxinol, the rifoxamide group, you'd be talking at waiting at least 6 weeks after you house before you dose. And if you're using the oxyclosinide or the other one, there you'll be talking on 12 weeks for at that stage for really not really practical. So you're talking maybe triclopentazole maybe 2 weeks after housing, or if you're using the other group there, the closantel, Trodex, and rifoxamide, you're talking about 6-7 weeks.
A lot of it will be dependent on the burden as well. So a lot of farmers that use those other two products would actually do them at housing and then do them 6 weeks later. So you're doubling up on the dose, just in case that it would be affecting sheep.
And just, I know we're a little over time, but I'm just going to ask one more question here, and either you can comment on it. Should we house the sheep 24 hours before dosing? That's the question there.
There was a recommendation that the doses are more effective, if you're dosing an animal at an empty stomach, but is it practical? Don't think so. So it's more. The bigger question would be just finding out how effective the drugs you're actually using in your farm, and I'd be more inclined to find that out first rather than housing animals and starving them for 24 hours.
Just on a practical point there, maybe a few hours after putting them in, because they've settled and most of their stomachs are smaller at that stage from a handling point of view. They're not there'll be less stress. Allow them to settle and then dose them.
Okay. I think we're a little bit over, so I'm going to wrap things up there. Thanks very much to John and to Tom for their presentations. That's it for this evening. I hope you found the presentations both helpful and interesting. And this presentation, along with our others, will be available on our regional YouTube channel tomorrow. The series will continue on the upcoming Tuesdays, and you can find full details by following Teagasc SLD Sligo Leitrim Donegal on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Next week's webinar, the focus moves to the environment, which of course will be an integral, important part of the new CAP agreement. And we'd love if you could join us again. And remember, despite the current restrictions, you can always contact your Teagasc advisor by phone, email, and text. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe and good night.